Right, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Chartered Institute of Credit Management webinar hosted by corporate partner Red Flag Alert. This webinar is titled The Insolvency Journey, Managing Customer and Supply Risk from Start to Finish. My name is Becky Sharp and I'll be facilitating today's session. Just before I hand over to today's host, just some simple housekeeping, if I may. This session is being recorded and a copy will be uploaded to our website, CICM.com, in the coming days, but also circulated to you shortly after the session is finished. We do ask if you could remain on mute throughout the whole session, please. And if you'd like to ask a question to any of our panelists, you can do so by adding it to the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will revisit these at the end of the session. I will now hand over to Sue Chappell to introduce today's guest. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Becky. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be hosting this session today with Red Flag on what is a very timely and topical subject. I think, you know, insolvency's never really gone away, but we had a slight pause from it over recent years, but it's definitely starting to come back. And I'm talking to more and more clients about how they deal with the process, how they anticipate the process, and how they get their teams more educated and aware on looking for early signs and moving through the process. So I think we're going to have a very good discussion. As Becky said, if you've got any questions, please stick them in the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on them, and we will cover them at the end. And if we don't get to them all, if we run out of time, as we often do on these sessions, we will pick up the answers to the questions and share them later. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my panel of experts to introduce themselves. I'm joined by Paul White, Hugh Powell and Mark Bishop. So Paul. Oh, Paul, you've committed the cardinal sin already. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. That's me unmuted now. My name's Paul White. I'm the Recoveries Director at Glenwood Commercial Debt Recovery. So I head up all the team here. We specialise in pre-litigation, litigation, and specifically insolvency and winding up actions.
Thank you, Paul. Hugh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hugh Powell. I head up our Welsh-based offices at Begbie's Trainer here. I like to position myself as a sort of corporate lifesaver, but the reality, unfortunately, is that most of my time is spent dealing with insolvency matters, so administrations, and sadly, there's a propensity for a lot of that work to be based around the construction sector. So, we're sector agnostic, but we end up having some expertise in those sectors that come around more often than others.
Thank you, Hugh. And Mark.
Thanks, Sue. I'm Mark Bishop. I'm Senior Business Development Manager at Red Flag. I head up construction for Red Flag, so go to market, helping clients onboard new suppliers, customers, and also, more importantly, monitor any adverse risk moving forward.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm conscious we've got limited time today, so we best crack on. Would you like to just take us through the process, first of all, Mark? That's the process that you go through, and then we can follow on from that.
Yeah, that's fine. So I prepared a quick slide deck.
We love one that's been prepared earlier.
We just quickly not so much used to Zoom, so let me quickly just share my screen. Can you see that okay, Sue?
Yeah.
Perfect. So hi everybody and welcome to the webinar. Just a few slides that I prepared. It's probably going to take about 10-15 minutes. Any questions, Sue and the team will be monitoring. I'm more than happy to answer at the back end of the presentation. So just a quick overview and introduction into Red Flag for those who are new to Red Flag. But Red Flag were founded within the Begbie's Trainer Group to support insolvency practitioners with unique business intelligence and insolvency data. Since 2004, we've evolved into the UK's only independent-owned credit referencing agency, delivering real-time data, predictive insolvency scores, and automated onboarding solutions. From our office in Manchester, and now obviously we've got a satellite office, I call it a satellite office, but office down in Cardiff, we now power advanced AML, KYC, KYB, and global business intelligence tools, enabling our customers worldwide access to onboard, monitor, and manage risk in seconds. Back in 2004, most decisions in financial markets and professional services were based on gut instincts and static reports. But back in 2004, we had a completely different view. Data was going to be the foundation for every major business decision. We knew businesses would need real-time predictive insights to spot early risks and deal with them before they become problems. What seems obvious now was a bold bet at the time, and today is just how the world works. This slide just gives you a representation of insolvencies in the construction sector as a whole. What we'll find is, I know we say construction is such a volatile sector, but there are particular activities in construction that are more volatile than others. So to give you a quick example, I've narrowed this down to a few activities of construction. One being specialist contractors, so the likes of groundworks, demolition, roofing, scaffolding, plastering, etc. These tend to be higher risk because of thin margins that they operate on and a heavy reliance on main contractor payment terms. And we see in obviously 30 days, 90 days. Recently, I've seen some customers refer to 120 days payment terms. So it has a really heavy weighting effect on cash flow, and they're very much prone to cash flow disruption if main contractor delays payment terms or ultimately fails. Another activity is civil engineering and general building, so small to medium main contractors and civil works. So we're seeing material costs inflation daily. Steel's been raising every single day for the past few months. Fixed rate pricing and payment disputes and retentions as well. And lastly, the last one I've noted for this slide is house building and residential development. So it includes SME developers, self-build firms, housing contractors. There's a heavy financing cash flow dependency, and they're sensitive to mortgage rates and housing demands as well. So the slides you're seeing quickly, just as a high-level overview, is an overview of our predictive scoring model. So it's 1, 2, and 3 red flags. The 2 and the 3 red flags is where it doesn't have a credit limit in play. And as you can see, those ratings of 2 and 3, last year we predicted an insolvency prediction of 95% in construction as a whole. By the end of 2025, going into Q1 of 2026, we do predict a 30% increase in insolvencies. During the Christmas period, and going into the new year, we traditionally see a spike of insolvencies in construction. This year, with a rise of larger business failures putting an additional strain on supply chains, we've already been monitoring an upwards trend. In construction, real-time monitoring of your customer ledger, your supply chain ledger, and subcontractors is no longer optional. Red Flag provides the capability to provide real-time monitoring, which is essential for protecting margins, cash flow, and continuity. So these will flag up early warnings of distress, protect your cash flow, prevent the domino effect, and improve decisions and efficiencies. The invisible burden of debt can trigger a domino effect across the construction sector and also multiple sectors. Rising costs for raw materials, energy, labour, inflexible fixed rate contracts are already putting pressure on businesses' cash flow. And in some cases, a single bad debt is enough to push businesses into failure. ISG, a £2.2 billion contractor, entered administration in September 2024 after major losses and fixed rate projects causing cash flow pressures. The collapse has had a ripple effect across multiple sectors, including construction. ISG's failure triggered a knock-on distress effect throughout the market and created that ripple effect. Some affected firms actually entered administration overnight due to unpaid debts and contract cancellations. It also affected sectors outside construction, and we're also seeing the effects until today. This event highlights the need for real-time supply chain monitoring to identify shared exposure early. In today's volatile market, we're relying on outdated financial reports or manual checks. It's no longer enough. Risk doesn't just come from the balance sheet, it comes from people, supply chains, and behavioral data that actually change daily. Red Flag Alert uses real-time and predictive analytics to give businesses the early visibility into emerging risks months before they become financial losses. Traditional credit reports, as I mentioned earlier on in the slide deck, and static reports, by the time they're pulled, the data is often out of date. Red Flag Alert uses company information daily, tracking over 90 key events such as unadvertised data, court data, late filings, director changes, and so on and so forth. Built with proprietary data, Red Flag predicts as a whole across the UK market, 93% of insolvencies on average 9 months in advance. By integrating Red Flag into CRMs, ERPs, onboarding systems, companies can continuously monitor their ledgers and supply chains for any apparent risks. So the data can be delivered to emails or into ERP systems to provide continuity and automation. Data alone is not only the solution, actionable intelligence is. Red Flag bridges the gap between data and decision making, providing the tools to automate credit workflows, visualize exposure, and share intelligence across departments. It's harder than ever to protect your business from sudden shocks. Our team are actively closely monitoring the sector's outlook over the next 3 to 6 months. Early indicators suggest that continuous strain across subcontractors and material suppliers. Daily updates and predictive models allow us to identify risk patterns, emerging failures before they actually happen. If you're worried about your current exposure or want clarity on your customers or suppliers, now's the time to act. Speak to our team for bespoke analysis, exclusive access to the Red Flag Alert platform, and every attendee from this webinar will be able to have a free ledger health check for 20 companies. So we'll be reaching out probably early next week to anybody that's attended and offer them a free ledger health check for customers, suppliers, or subcontractors. That's it from me.
Great, thanks, Mark. Some interesting and slightly terrifying numbers in there, I think, predicting a 30% increase. I think let's move on to some practical stuff, and then we won't all be weeping into our coffee as we move forward. I think one of the things that Carillion and subsequently ISG has told us is, if we didn't already know, we now know overtly that the construction supply chain is more complicated than many sectors. The main contractor and the extended supply chain, as you say, full of opportunity for issues, and the ripple effect is huge. So, Hugh, I wanted to ask you, what practical steps do you think business should be taking when insolvency becomes likely, before it is happening?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, there isn't really any substitute for knowing your customer beforehand. And actually, because of the way that construction companies work with subcontractors, it's knowing your customer's customer. It's knowing the whole supply chain and really trying to get those risk mitigants in advance, and that information and data that Mark referenced, and I'm sure Paul will also talk about, just having that sector expertise, keeping your ear to the ground, hopefully allows you to be ahead of the game and make sure you're not caught out. It is important to sort of recognise that only about 0.5% of companies go through a formal insolvency every year, so it's pretty meaningful. But it's not, it's 1 in every 200 companies generally go bust formally. Having said that, it's around 17% of all insolvencies are related to the construction sector, where construction businesses only make up about 11% of all UK companies. So it is out of kilter in construction. It's one of those sectors that sort of, it happens too early. But broadly speaking, you want to be looking for early warning signs. And then if those warning signs are there, you need to act fast and using as much data as you can to get you ahead of the game, but obviously keeping in touch directly with your customer, making sure that if anything strange is happening with valuation disputes or if they're changing payment terms, changes in management, changes in other subcontractors on the site. There's a whole raft of early warning signs that would say to you, there's a problem here. And you do need to act fast, because if a company does go bust in this sector or is facing real significant issues, unfortunately, there's very few options. So we pride ourselves on rescuing businesses, but refinancing and restructuring a construction company is harder probably than any other sector.
Thanks, Hugh. And although I know you say in absolute terms the numbers are small, if it's whoppers like Carillion and ISG, they touch so much of the economy, not just their direct supply chain, but wider.
Absolutely.
So the numbers in absolute terms might be relatively low, but the impact is huge. And one of the challenges that happens when a company starts to fail is that the supply chain pulls their horns in. And it's very difficult to keep things going to prevent the ultimate failure. So, Paul, I want to ask you, what do you do to ensure that projects are kept running when a supplier fails?
I guess probably to reiterate a bit what Hugh was saying, I mean, you need to know your customers. To go back to the ISG example, we knew that ISG were in trouble, 2 years before they formally went into company voluntary liquidation. We were actually paid. One of our clients. We got one of our clients paid before they submitted a notice to court, a notice of intention to appoint a liquidator. 75k. That was inclusive of our client's debt recovery fees. I think the debt was circa 68k, so we got them 68k plus costs. When a lot of people weren't being paid by ISG, we as a business collected a lot of money from ISG. We are specialists to the construction sector, so we tend to see trends with instructions across our client base. To give you an idea, we've got circa 3,000 clients who are subcontractors, main contractors, building supply, pretty much the majority of the sort of construction marketplace. So we kind of see that. We see what's happening, and our ears very much to the ground with our client base. We also, we are partnered with a Red Flag Alert as well. I would say that's a must. If you're sitting with a ledger, you need to be monitoring your customers all the time to reduce your risk. Something else that you need to consider as well, something that seems obvious, is your terms and conditions. So how you can reduce your risk is, you can have personal guarantees in there. That opens up a kind of separate discussion for another day, I guess, if anybody wants to come and ask me about it. But you can put a personal guarantee into your terms. It doesn't necessarily need to be signed as a separate legal document. And that will give you, if the company does go into liquidation, that gives you a route to recovery later against the director personally. I guess the other thing I'd like to really stress here is that one of the best ways to reduce your risk to liquidations, because they're always going to happen, is quick action as well. I have a case today, so working commercial debt recovery. It's in Birmingham. It's a substantial amount of money, and our client sat on it for 6 months when we know that other creditors are being paid in front of him. So, you need to be really rigid with your payment terms. And it's all about process. A lot of customers that we deal with think that, debtors might be offended in some way at getting a debt recovery letter, or they're a good customer. If it's just part of process and you're actioning stuff, I would always recommend, if your credit terms are 60 days, I would say you need to have a trigger point in your ledger between 90 and 120 days. If your credit terms are 30 days, a fair trigger point is 60 to 90 days, and you need to follow that trigger point and get it out as part of process as well. Quick action is imperative. The other thing you should do within your credit terms, it's not always possible if you're a subcontractor, but if you're working in building supply, is you should make sure that you've always got the right to withdraw terms at any time. So if you're using red flag for monitoring and something comes up where there's an anomaly, you don't necessarily need to wait 30 days or 60 days to pass that case out to recovery. You know, you can, if it's addressed in your terms and conditions, then you can pass it out at any point where there's due cause. And again, to reiterate what Hugh's saying, you really need to know your customers as well, and you need to understand what's going on in their projects, and you know, and that's the best way to kind of avoid liquidations, I guess.
Thanks, Paul. And interesting what you say about parental guarantees. I think we could have a whole session on that by itself.
Yeah, personal.
Obviously, personal guarantees. It's important to know your customer even more so, and very difficult to work out if there's a whole raft of PGs being issued to everybody and actually they're worth nothing. But I suppose you could start from working out what assets exist in the first place. If nothing exists, then there's no point. But just, you know, in terms of some practical stuff, can you talked about getting some money in from clients early when others had failed. Can you give some examples of actual practical interventions that the kinds of things, I don't want you to give away your company secrets, but practical interventions that you would take that have prevented loss?
Well, I guess it just all harks back to quick action. You know, for me, the main things that our clients need to do is you need to credit check their customers. In the first instance, they need to monitor their customers. They need to know who their customers are, and they need to be ready to act really quickly as well. Personal guarantees, cross-company guarantees, where you're extending credit terms to a customer where you're not sure of, or you think there's quite a bit of risk, an absolute must. And if your customer's refusing to sign those, then you know there's your answer right there. I think, you know, also what we deal with a lot of, we deal with a kind of broad spectrum of businesses, from PLCs down to kind of SME type businesses. And I guess in the bigger businesses, there's always a conflict between sales and accounts receivable. And sometimes you just need to stand up to your sales guys and say, look, you know, we're not going to take this customer on. It's not a sale if you don't get paid. The business isn't making money. But yeah, in terms of practical stuff, you need to implement a trigger point in your ledger, and get your cases out to recovery quickly. In terms of risk, that's done at the start, in the onboarding point, when you kind of take on your customer. And then if you monitor your customers through Red Flag Alert, which is an excellent system that we use as well, then you know that'll flag up any issues, things like petitions going in. A lot of the time, we automatically, as part of process, if a customer has a winding up petition in against them, it tells it Red Flag Alert. We get a notice to say that there's a winding up petition, and we'll issue a notice of support right away as part of our process.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you was how early in the process and what were the indicators. And I'm conscious we keep mentioning Red Flag because obviously they're a corporate partner. This is not a sales campaign for Red Flag, and other tools in the market do exist. So if we just think about what would be the first kind of indicator, Hugh, that you would be wanting teams to look at, to say, God, if we see that as an indicator from any of the tools that we're using, we really need to act now. What would be your real red flag in inverted commas?
Sure. Yeah, and look, I think I touched on a couple of those sort of early warning signs around, you know, late payments, valuation disputes, you know, changes in personnel. But I think it does go beyond that. You know, if you've got variations on the contract, that generally means that they're not completely in control, that they haven't necessarily worked out their pathway. And if you're varying a contract, it might be because you found some Roman ruins in the on the site and you've had to move things. But if it's not for something that sounds legitimate, it probably means they're not planning things. And Mark mentioned earlier about tight margins. You can't really afford to be varying contracts and still making profits. Increasing WIP is probably one of the things, like again, Mark referenced that you don't want to be reviewing 9 months, 12 months out of date accounts, really. It doesn't particularly help. But if you see WIP going up and a business increasing their turnover, a lot of construction businesses team and laid. So whilst they're growing, that's fine. But quite often, is that WIP actually recoverable, and are they making the profit that they're booking to their accounts, or in fact, are they just sort of growing uncontrollably? And then you hit an issue. So I mean, at the moment in South Wales, we've got some issues with sulfates and nitrates in the ground, which is delaying sort of planning permissions and delaying the start of work. If you have that, or obviously something like COVID comes along, then what you have is the sort of the cash stops coming in and the music stops. There's probably not going to be enough chairs, and I mean, to your point earlier, Sue, yeah, like it doesn't feel like 0.5% of companies go bust. Obviously, Mark referenced the domino effect. I don't think there's many companies that we speak to that aren't feeling some issues at the moment. And then you have got a lot of businesses just trying to manipulate their accounts. I mean, I'll never forget doing. I was quite a junior sort of person at KPMG doing a cash flow review for a PLC, and they just stopped payments every quarter and hoarded cash. Obviously, you need to look at the overall current asset and liability position, because if creditors are going up significantly, I mean, this is a business that had 50 million cash on the 31st of January, for argument's sake. On the 1st of February, they had £5 cash because they delayed their payments by a day in order to massage things. And so it's sort of, looking for factors like that.
Yeah, you've got to stay on top of it. Thank you. I used to work for EDF Energy, and I can remember when Hinkley C, the new power station, I'm calling it the new power station, it's still in the process of being built, was delayed by 2 years because there were gold crested newts, I think, on the land, and although and bats, I think there were some bats as well, and although we're all in favour of protecting wildlife, the cost of that, because in the nuclear world, some very specialist people who you've got to retain. So those things do have a massive knock-on effect. And of course, the high-level tier 1 contractor, everybody understands that and makes way for it. But further down the line, we saw a little bit with Jaguar Land Rover with their recent issue, how the long supply chain could be protected in the absence of production. So I think, we talk a lot about knowing your customer, knowing your customer's customer, knowing your supplier and their suppliers and all of that. And we at the CICM, that's one of the drums that we bang consistently. One of the things that we hear a lot from our members and clients is that system capability in companies just doesn't always exist to retain that data. It's we as credit managers are really good at holding things together on access databases and spreadsheets and paper clips and string and just sheer grit and determination, and we still manage to get the results. But it does mean that maintaining and keeping this kind of information up to date is challenging for organizations. And Mark, I know it exists, and obviously there are other tools apart from Red Flag, but these kind of tools now can be integrated with systems without a massive IT project spend, can't they?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously there's multiple options across multiple vendors whereby you can take an API option. Obviously, with an API, there's some development work at the customer side and the mapping process, but there are some solutions on the market now where you can actually integrate using an app, and that app sits within a ERP environment, a sales environment, the likes of sales CRMs as well, and it provides the sales team plus the accounts receivable team with additional insight, which isn't offline, which isn't just in the spreadsheets or in the notebooks of the credit managers, but actually the wider business, accounts receivable and sales, can access credit risk analysis on new data. So any new customers that come through the website, any new business comes through, can be credit checked at the front end, but more importantly then have the ability to have that retention of data across the existing book of business as well. So there's definitely solutions on the market. There's automation solutions as well, where multiple vendors offer a onboarding solution where you can credit check the front end and then input that data into a ERP or CRM system at the back end.
Thank you. And I think for those of you on the call working in these challenging areas, if you haven't looked at these kind of solutions before, and say Red Flag is one of them, there are other different types of solutions that do different things, but you do no longer have to get a massive business case for an IT project. It's, you know, these things, because they're often apps or links, they can come out of OpEx, which does make it slightly different prospect in the budget moving forward, and they can even be pay-as-you-go subscription type activities that you can dip in and dip out of depending on what your need is. So I think that's one of the things that's really come to the fore over the last 2 or 3 years, is the availability of technical support in the process. So we're not on our own anymore. I think, you know, we know that businesses are going to fail. We know that we do everything we can to support them, but they do fail. One of the challenges is how do you balance recovery with maintaining good long-term relationships? And Paul, I suppose you're at the sharp end of that, because that's your job. You're out there collecting after the fact. Yeah.
Well, I guess the kind of simple answer is that, you know, our clients are instructing us, it kind of takes them away from it. So, you know, we're then dealing with the relationship with the debtor from that point, obviously on our clients' instructions. So it kind of it cuts them out the loop. And really, when we are dealing with customers, we're quite consultative in terms of what type of approach we want to take. We don't, to give you an idea, we probably have about 300 live litigations just now. 100 of those will be winding up actions north and south of the border. You know, we don't just wind up companies. You know, we've got a kind of plethora of demands that we use. You know, we can go in with, you know, a very simple third-party demand. We can issue a 7-day demand. We can issue a notice of intention to wind up, giving sort of 3 days to pay. It depends. Our customers tend to tell us, they'll say, look, we don't want to work with these people anymore. You know, fill your boots and do your worst. So I guess it kind of depends on the type of debt as well. You know, to issue winding up petitions, which is your most effective debt recovery tool, you need to have a fairly clean debt, but that's not suitable for every single case, and we're quite consultative with that. If our clients want to sort of maintain relationships, and we're mindful of that, but very much by appointing us, you're kind of taking that dynamic out the loop, because we are then taking over the relationship with the debtor as well. But what I would say is that, you know, if you've got particularly if you're a builder's merchant, or you know, you're dealing kind of supply only, and this doesn't really apply to subcontract stuff that is more contractual contracts. You know, you're probably, you know, as long as you've got process in your ledger, your clients are not offended. So as long as you're a process-driven business, then your customer base is unlikely to be offended. So they know that their credit terms are, let's say, 30 days. And they know that the dunning process is that the credit controller from the business is going to phone, that the credit controller is going to issue emails, that the credit controller is going to issue dunning letters before instructing a third party. So as long as you've ticked all the boxes, then it's just very much process. And, you know, sometimes when I'm dealing with debtors on the ground, and some of them become offended that, oh, I've worked with your client and spent, you know, £10 million over the last 20 years with them, and I can't believe they've instructed you for you know, £20,000 debt. You know, we're having temporary cash flow issues. But the reality is we simply explain to that customer that that it's part of process, and that they're out with credit terms, and not to be offended, and that everybody is treated the same, and that obviously our customer's a business as well, and they need to get their cash in, you know, regardless of how kind of small it is. So I guess we find that balance for our customers sort of day to day. But the best way probably not to offend your customers is to have a fairly blanket approach, but obviously you can be selective in your ledger as well, where you might say, do you know what, here's, you know, I don't know, here's Balfour Beatty or somebody that spends a lot of money with you, you know, and they tend to pay you slowly. You can take, you know, be selective and kind of, you know, take those customers out of your process, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you have a big customer and they're spending a lot of money with you, you know, and you're keen not to offend them, but they're not paying you, you just need to try and get the balance with them. You know, and as long as you follow the process, then you know the customers tend not to be too offended by the debt recovery process. More
A
often,
mentor of mine once told me a long time ago, a customer who is not paying is not a customer, they are a thief. And it's always stuck with me, that. I think
Well,
it's true.
yeah, I wouldn't go that strongly, but you'd be amazed the amount of apologies that some of our clients get, where, you know, it comes to debt recovery and the case is paid immediately and they go back to our client and say, I'm really sorry about this. It shouldn't have happened. You've been, you know, if you come to me directly in future. And so a good customer will always kind of, a good customer, I think, will always kind of understand and, you know, would they accept not being paid for such a long time as well?
Yeah,
I
I
doubt it
suppose
very
so, but
much.
circumstances are such that they're not always in a position to pay for a variety of reasons, and that I suppose is where the skill and expertise comes in.
Yeah.
Before thank you, Paul. Before we carry on with this, I just wanted to clarify something, Mark, that's popped up in the chat. You mentioned at the beginning you're expecting a 30% increase in insolvencies in this space for the rest of this year. What are you expecting for next year?
So we do a financial forecast, which is released at the start of the year about the potential forecast of insolvencies going into the next 12 months. So I'm guessing someone's asked that. Yeah, Ian. What I'll be more than happy to do, Ian, is share that report. So we're just finalising the data as we speak. So as we go into maybe the back end of December, I'll be more than happy to share the report with you guys.
Anecdotally, are you still seeing
yeah, I think it's what we're seeing going into 2026, although there's going to be a spike, and I think that's just around the pressures of Christmas and tools down and cash flow issues as we always see. But there's still going to be a substantial increase quarter on quarter.
Thank you. And I think, one of the things that we're seeing right across the economy, of course, not just in construction, but construction always gets hit the hardest, is the uncertainty in the economy. There are so many uncertain things, and I think all of us would agree that the level of uncertainty really is such that we've never seen it before, because it's everywhere. It's on the global stage, on the local stage, and almost at every level. And that uncertainty in itself causes volatility. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah,
so
I think
very
consumer
much
spending can definitely around acquiring or purchasing new houses, etc. I think it's just a worrying statistic to look at and to judge really if there's going to be any downfall with house builders and how that affects the wide supply chain as well.
That again's an interesting one, isn't it? So I was at a Bank of England economic update recently, and there's that they were talking about unintended consequences of some of the rhetoric that's going on at the moment, and you've got this slight contradiction of the political world saying we're going to build 750,000 houses or whatever it is, and the real world saying there's not a single developer in the UK building houses right now. So and that in itself, contradiction, causes uncertainty, which causes financial distress and all of those things. So I think we've got a lot of stuff to consider as we move into next year. But going back to the process, Hugh, I'm keen to understand from you what a good supplier recovery plan looks like, because we're always keen to get back on track.
Sure. Yeah, and there is some good news, because all is not lost, albeit it does depend.
Hooray!
Well, it does depend on what it is you supply. So, if you're a fuel supplier to a company in the construction sector, then you're going to find it pretty hard to get your fuel back out of vehicles. If you are a builder's merchant, then I'd imagine, particularly your sort of bigger ones, always have personal guarantees, and they'll have retention of title, and so you can hopefully recover some physical assets from a site. Not everyone is supplying. You might be supplying services, not supplying physical assets. That obviously gets a bit harder. However, there's normally some form of leverage. So whether that's the retention of warranties or certificates, especially in the sort of electrical and gas space, whether that's drawings and designs, it may be bespoke materials. It may be that you've created some sort of glass entrance hallway, and you've got the specification, no one else necessarily has it. So you might have intellectual property around, half the windows are in, they've got a particular opening mechanism maybe. So you want to use that leverage as much as you possibly can to say, if this site is going to stop for a period, we want to be in pole position in order to sort of pick it up with any new developer that might come in. The reality is that when a business goes bust, there will be some loyalty to the owners and the business that they worked for, but actually the employees are at risk of redundancy. So probably the smartest thing to do is get in touch with the person on site that you've got the best contact with, and or a director. Find out what's going on. If the rumor mill is swirling, there are different sort of insolvency processes. Some come with a notice of intention to appoint administrator, and that has to be filed in advance. Increasingly, we're not filing it in advance because people out there, including our learned friend with his headset on, are telling everyone that it's been done, which is not very helpful if you're trying to structure something sometimes. But there are scrapes off, the court records that the different credit management systems sort of provide. And so we try and keep things under wraps, but actually there are meetings happening, as you can imagine. People know that we're going into businesses, and that's the time to be talking to employees and saying, right, if this goes bust, I want to make sure that my product is set to one side so that I can take it away. I want to make sure that you put me in touch with anyone. In fact, you might want to offer a job to someone who is key to a project, or definitely keep close to them, make sure you've got their mobile number. It sounds ridiculous, but their mobiles will get cut off if they get made redundant. So get their personal number. Don't rely on the work number you've been using, and try and just maintain that continuity so that if the project carries on, you're not left out in the cold with someone else coming in and fixing the issue.
Thank you, Hugh. Mark, I want to come back to talking about the opportunities, but I just wanted to cover, Paul, when you mentioned about the winding up petitions as a tool. The interesting one, we have lots of conversations about these, and of course the winding up order is the absolute nuclear option, and we do see companies using them without due thought and due process for that, because once you've done it, haven't you? So we might come back to that as a conversation on another day, when and how they get used to most effect. But Mark, I wanted to talk about when there is an insolvency, do you see opportunities when that can be turned into a positive opportunity as a result of the insolvency?
Yeah, in some scenarios, obviously it depends on the level of risk and the exposure that said business has with that particular insolvency. What we find and what I'm doing at the moment, in particular with main contractors, is monitoring the subcontractors, or the subcontractors they have appointed to the projects. If there is a particular insolvency of one of the subcontractors, our system plus other vendors will give you the capabilities to look for a new subcontractor to replace them mid-project. So rather than waiting until the last minute and knowing that actually this subcontractor is going to fail and it's going to affect project delays, cost, resources, etc., using the right tool gives companies the capabilities to replace a subcontractor months in advance. So it just allows them to put a contingency plan in place. So I think it's all around that data-led decision process to help credit management teams, procurement teams understand how they can use data in a way that actually benefits the business if there's any risk of insolvencies later down the line. So yeah, there's it's two ways to look at it. Obviously, if it's an insolvency from a customer perspective, I think it's recovering their risk, having trade credit insurance in play, obviously just to protect the business, but from a procurement level, using data to identify maybe an opportunity, as Hugh mentioned there, to try and find a way through the insolvency itself.
Thank you. And I think it's interesting because we hear a lot of talk everywhere about AI, and almost to the point that I think we all get a bit snowblind from the conversations around it. The reality of it is it's not really in play in many places at the moment. There's some automation, there's a bit of robotics, there's a few bits of stuff. But if we do get to the stage where we've got some, good solid tools at the front end of the process, that should free up our proper skilled staff to spend more time on what is now a key role: knowing your customer, knowing their customer, looking out for risk. The tools, the automated tools and the technology are really important, but there is nothing like having someone go to site, having someone see what actually is being done. If you've got a level of risk out with anyone in the supply chain, what actually is it they do? Are you sure about that? And the changes to company house as they pick up momentum are going to help us as well from a risk perspective. I'm very conscious of time, as I always am, because these things always run away with us because they're so interesting. We've talked about quite a lot of negative stuff. We've picked up a few positive things. We don't want to send everyone off thinking they're going to hell in a handcart. So let's have a little think about, from your experience, one from each of you, Mark, you and Paul, what would be a top call that a business should make when one of their key suppliers is going to go insolvent? Hugh. One,
yeah, I think I should be saying call the IP, but I think I would call a site-based employee. Like I say, what that site-based employee can do is talk to you about what's actually happening on the ground, what the status of the site is, whether it's going to move on, assuming it is a site-based scenario, and then obviously you just sort of want to go and act legally, so it'll be easier to resolve that, to get access to the site before a company formally goes into insolvency, where it's likely to get locked down. The important thing is to act within the law. I think everyone will remember.
Yes, we will reiterate that within the law.
Well, I think the chap in Liverpool, I think he was owed £600 in wages, and drove his digger through the front door of a Travelodge in Liverpool, causing about £500,000 worth of damage. He ended up in prison, and we've had similar issues. We dealt with the Jehu construction insolvency in Wales. It was a sort of 70 million turnover business doing 15 sites across Wales and into the southwest of England. And somebody came along, one of our ground workers jumped into our excavator and drove off. He took the tracker off, threw it on the floor and drove off. And we had him on CCTV, and we said, "You seem to have accidentally taken our excavator. If you bring it back, it'll be fine. But if you don't, then we're going to have a problem." And look, money's emotive. It can really cause an impact, the domino effect Mark talked about. But ultimately, what you don't want to be doing is necessarily going in and ripping boilers off the wall if you've installed them, because then you might find that actually the site's going to reopen and they need boilers, and actually, because they need the gas certificates, you were going to get paid for them. Instead, you've got a damaged boiler in your storage unit and not knowing what to do. So look, it's frustrating, but act quickly, act within the law, and contact your employees on site to try and find out what's happening.
I think that's really great advice about contacting the employees on site. And I think depending on the scale of the risk that your organisation is facing into, there's a lot to be said for the old school world of getting in the car and going and have a look yourself.
Exactly.
Depending where it is, I think that used to be absolutely commonplace. But in the world of Zooms and Teams and changing technology, it's not done so much now, and it's so powerful when it's done. And often organisations will say it's absolutely worth the investment of the time and the travel costs 10 times over. Thank you, Hugh. Paul, sorry, were you going to say something else? No.
So just agreeing with you, Sue.
Thank you. I like that. Thank you. Paul, one from you. One early call that a business should make.
I'm
You're on mute again.
Yeah, oh, there we go. Sorry. Yeah.
Forfeit for you.
Yeah, apologies. Sometimes it's not too late. I mean, we've had cases recently against Petrofac, which was a big oil company in Aberdeen, which we were also paid on as well, which is now going into administration. So what I would say is Glenwood action cases within an hour of us being instructed, and we'll issue a 72-hour notice of intention to wind up. Sometimes we can get in front of the liquidator and cause a bit of disruption, and they'll just pay us to go away, basically. You know, sometimes it's small potatoes in the big picture, and if they're trying to get an appointment, they might just want to pay just to make that issue go away, because there's a lot of other more serious issues to deal with. So, you know, sometimes we get paid at the last minute. You know, if the company goes into liquidation, we also offer a free service where we'll submit your Glenwood offer a free service where we'll submit your claim forms to the liquidator for you. We'd be looking at things like, you know, do you have title over any of the material you've supplied? You know, you're looking at sort of coordinating with the liquidator. Do they need that material? Maybe the new business will purchase it off you if there is a new business or there's a deal to be done. Something I'd just say in general is, you know, it's just knowing your customer again. You know, is there somebody you know on the ground? Kind of reiterates a bit what you were saying. You know, is there somebody that you can go to, that you can speak to, and potentially you might be able to reduce your exposure by doing some future work with the liquidator or the new people that sort of that come in. You know, but like I say, sometimes it's not too late, and you know, if you instruct it quick enough, if you hear, because more often than not, you know, particularly in the ISG cases, you know, it's well known that the liquidators were in there already and they were about to appoint any day. So if you're just sitting thinking, right, I've lost my money, that's not necessarily true. You might not have lost your money. You know, get the case out to recovery quick, and you know, somebody like yourselves and any other third parties, you know, will act quickly. But what I would say is we act really quick within an hour. So yeah.
All is not lost, Paul, is the message.
All is not lost. Yeah, stay positive.
Mark.
To be honest, I think to answer your question, from my perspective, is to either speak to Hugh or speak to Paul. But I think, like I said, data-driven decisions, having the ability to look into the future and also look at your customers, your supply chain, your subcontractors, having the right level of intelligence, not just from the vendors, but internally, understanding the market, site visits, anything that you could do that comes up on your radar where you feel a bit concerned. Obviously, just allow you to hold your cards close to your chest and reduce the exposure before actually it gets to the point of insolvency. But yeah, if it does get late down the line, speak to Hugh or Paul. Who can manage.
Thank you. Other Paul and Hughes do exist.
Yeah,
well, for the for the purpose of balance. And I think there are some things that, you know, come up time and time again that as organisations we're very aware of, but they don't get done. I mean, we had quite a long session at the law conference yesterday, as we always do, about contractual terms and the fit for purpose or not of organisations' contracts. And I think most companies that we talk to, contracts have been put together, and I'm going to say honed in complementary terms, over many, many years, but in very few cases do they get rewritten. And one of the things that comes up from our legal partners regularly is that the rewrites often cause the contracts to be even less suitable than they were before. So it does feel that in today's world, because so much has changed, the context of contractual agreements need to change. So that would be something that we would definitely recommend you get someone to look at. You can usually get a first free advice from your legal teams about it if you've got external ones. But there's all sorts of things. You know, we've talked about personal guarantees, parental guarantees, retention of title, all sorts of stuff that get tagged onto. We see them tagged onto contracts in a way that when you're actually up against it are not valid.
One
So
thing sorry to interrupt this. So just on PGs, one thing that I would say is for providers to do consumer credit checks against the PGs. But more importantly, if you guys don't feel comfortable doing the consumer credit checks, is to do an identification verification check against the consumer. We've had some scenarios where they've come back and said, that's not me. So it just gives you an extra level of protection when issuing and enforcing the PG as well.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Mark. The other thing that we know in today's world, and we've touched on it a little bit today, there's any amount of technology and tools, and just take the time to have a look around, see what works best for your business. Don't be thinking that you're entering in some massive IT program that's never going to get signed off. You're not now. And actually the cost benefit case can usually be quite clearly justified. And if you've got some provisions on your book, if you're looking into some write-offs as you move forward, that can often be the balancing entry. So don't shy away from that. And then I think that the thing that we never overlook, the most important tool in your toolbox is your people. And I think we're in a world now where it's time to review how we use our people, and some of the things that we've talked about today, getting your expert staff active and involved in understanding your clients and their customers and their suppliers and so on and so on and so on, but actually being given the opportunity and the time and the skills and the training to do it, that will pay off in spades. And it also makes life more interesting for your teams, which means that retention is easier and you're less likely to suffer from attrition, which in today's world, again, is very hard. So let me have a quick look in the chat box. No more questions in the chat box. If anyone has got any other questions after the meeting, please do whiz them over to Becky. We'll make sure they get answered and they'll come back to you. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much to Mark, to Paul and to Hugh, and for Sinead and Becky behind the scenes for putting all this together for us. It's been lovely spending this time with you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye.